We have lost so many amazing and inspirational things in our history, in this modern era that we live in. Stuff from the past that a lot of people either never took seriously enough or neglected. And one of those things is titles. I truly believe that we used to have way better console names than the shitty new names we have today of game systems. We used to have names of consoles like the Sega Genesis, the TurboGrafx 16, Sega Dreamcast, Sega Saturn, the Atari Jaguar, and nowadays we just have the Xbox One. The Xbox One. And all this other shitty titles, like the Wii is a shitty title, the Wii U is a shitty title, the Switch is a shitty title, PS4, PS5, the PlayStation gets a pass because they've always done that. Even back in the day, every PlayStation console was just named after a number. PS1, PS2, PS3, 4, and 5. PlayStation gets a pass, but even still, Xbox, the Xbox One, it's such a shitball title. It's terrible. And also, like the Nintendo GameCube. Like in the 90s and the 2000s, we used to have these really badass names. Like it started to die off after the GameCube, the first Xbox, and the PS2. After that, you had the 360, which is actually a pretty cool title. And that was the last decent titled name game console, because the Wii title sucked and the PS3 is like okay. After the 360, every title of every game console was terrible. Like especially in the 90s, it was very like cool and interesting, these like edgy titles like the Super Nintendo, the Virtual Boy, just shit like that. All these badass titles of game systems. The Turbo Express, the Atari Lynx, like I mentioned earlier, the Atari Jaguar, the Sega 32X, Sega Saturn, shit like that. It was used to be so cool, and now we just have, all these terrible titles. Oh my god. Dog shit. And also, why not? Let's talk about this. What about console design? I thought that the old console designs were so much cooler and so much more interesting. Obviously, this just comes down to an artistic appeal. This is just a subjective thing. I mean, it's all subjective, but I just think the designs of the new consoles are really bland. They're just so generic and lazy. It's just no passion, really, in the new designs of consoles. They're, like, soulless and... Like, I understand these companies were always about money. All these game companies, Nintendo, Sega, Atari, whatever. But you can at least try to put some passion into the stuff about them. At least you can do that to make it seem like it's not a soulless cash grab. Like the old designs were so much cooler and so much more interesting. It seemed like they were always trying to do something different. But the new consoles play it like ultra safe with the titles and the designs of the consoles. And like the worst contender of them all is Xbox as a brand. First of all, this fucking company doesn't belong in the game industry. Yes, like Windows created the popular computer for homes, but they just flung themselves into the video game market when they first released the Xbox, and it was just so soulless, like their whole thing. It's like you could tell, like Bill Gates and the rest of them, they didn't give a shit about video games. They just like saw how popular all these other companies were and the money they were making and how they actually care about their games. And Microsoft came in and they were like, "Oh, well, we just want some of that cash." That's what Xbox always seemed like, because if you remember back in the day, if you're old enough to, the PS1 and the N64, they had people making games for those consoles that were really passionate about making games. And then when the Xbox first came out, a lot of games on the Xbox, the original Xbox, were ports from other game consoles that already existed. Because the Xbox was just a random game console. It didn't have any legs, really. Yes, it had graphics that were impressive, but I just think Microsoft as a brand is so soulless and all that shit. Video game menus. I remember, like, the old school video game menus used to look really cool looking. They had a lot of color and a lot of interesting design choices. And they seemed mysterious and alluring. And it seemed like when you looked at an old game console menu, it seemed like you were in the console, you were like in its world. And it seemed like a very, really like interesting place to be. Like it seemed deep and mysterious. Like, ooh, like what is this place I'm in? Kind of like being Alice in Wonderland. But the new game menus for the new consoles, like ever since the fucking Wii came out, the Wii menu was so boring. It was just all white and just had shitty background music and everything super bland and really just dull and everything. And the worst is the contender is like the fucking PS3. The PS3 menu was just the same thing as the PSP menu. They just used the same menu for both systems. And how lazy is that? Yeah, some people would call that, oh, that's organized. Fuck that. Uh, the PS3 is not the same game console as the PSP. Okay? Ass wipes, the two different game systems. So give them both two different menus. And the menu for the PS3 is so boring. I mean, it's just, it's so dull and lifeless. I feel like I'm at the DMV or the bank or something when I'm using it. Like, that's the vibe I feel. I don't know, I'm all into vibes. I guess a lot of people aren't. I think that's something that's lost, that's really lacking in modern people, young and old. There's a lot of people now that just don't get imagination, really. They're not getting it, not getting it. It's either because they grew up with none or they just, the two, like, brainwashed by all the commercials and all that shit. Like, what happened to the imagination? The allureness of the old game consoles that they used to have. It's way more than nostalgia. It's just, you can look at them now. Even if you didn't grow up with them, you can see by comparison that one is very imaginative and interesting, and the other is just a boring piece of shit. Okay? It's all over the place. The Wii U menu was pretty terrible. It was really cringy with all the fucking Miis walking around, and the shitty background music, once again, it sounds like I'm in some shitty elevator and all that. Awful. Just dreadful. And it keeps coming. Like, the Switch menu was terrible. I mean, it's okay for what it is, but all these... It's just, I'm so tired of the laziness and the non-creativity in these companies that used to really give a shit. They used to be like... They didn't always play it safe. Like, if you look at the Atari Jaguar, and that came out in 1993, and it was 64-bit, and the other game consoles were 16-bit. That was a ballsy move. That was a rebellious move. It felt like a 90s thing. It was just so, like, it felt like kind of like almost anti-authoritarian. It was just, we don't have that ballsiness anymore. Now everything is like playing it ultra safe. Everything is just really dull and dry. It's just so fucking annoying. And that's why I love the old video games way more than the new ones. I mean, these are just a couple of reasons, and they're pretty big ones, but, I mean, I'm into aesthetics, I'm into vibes, so... I mean, let me know what you guys think. If you agree, disagree. I hope you don't disagree, because I really don't want these fucking companies to keep making all this boring, generic shit with any new game consoles that come out. I really don't. Let's get back to the Sega Saturns. Let's get back to the N64s, the old style, the edgy, cool shit. Let's get back to that. I'm tired of the bland, HD, boring, ultra clean shit. I'm tired of it. I appreciate if you watched the video to the end. Thank you very much. I hope I entertained you. Anyway, my name is SuperPet98, and have a fantastic afternoon.